Hi there, and welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth. Thank you for joining me today. If you're new to the channel, I'm Anah Parreli. I used to retail crystals. I've said this in the past. I have a passion for crystals. I absolutely love them. I do find them a little bit addictive. And basically, what I'm trying to do is set up a community where we can share information on how we can buy crystals from reputable sellers, how we can grow and learn from each other in regard to metaphysical purposes and properties. And as with all of the videos that I put up in the playlists on YouTube, I always start out with the fundamental information first. So for this video today, it is a long one, but it's talking about generalist buying tips and strategies online that might be helpful. Now, you're invited to put your contributions in. And just a reminder, when I have these long videos, because today's is a long video, I do put chapters in. Okay, so feel free to jump ahead, jump backwards, whatever, as you go through. But onwards with the video, let's start sharing right now. So, generally speaking, when a person is looking to buy a crystal, they're generally trying to buy it for a specific purpose, and that would be its metaphysical attributes. They might be trying to heal an issue such as overcome their fears, maybe heal their broken heart, clear their mind, or they may have physical health issues, and somebody has said to them, you could get a crystal and wear a crystal to help you with that condition X, Y, and Z, or if they're experiencing some mental or psychological anguish and turmoil, there's recommendations for crystals for those, that carry those healing attributes. Now, of course, I'm reminding you of the disclaimer associated with anything metaphysical and attributes. And when we talk about physical and mental health, it really is a case of whatever the attributes are associated with these. With the crystal that you pick, that you use your common sense as well. You don't stop seeing a doctor or getting professional medical advice or whatever simply because you're trying out alternative therapies. They generally are complementary to whatever treatment that you're getting, and there's no real harm done with giving it a try. Excuse me as I clear my throat. Now, the other thing too is, of course, if you're thinking to yourself as you hear me speaking, oh, well, I've got a toothache, maybe I need to go and look for that. Well, actually, yes, there are crystals that do carry the attributes of healing a toothache, but you wouldn't ignore going to the dentist because you've got a toothache, okay? You would use the crystal as part of relieving and a bit of remediation, if you like, until you can get to that dentist, but you would not delay going to the dentist because you're using a crystal. So anyway, going back to how we would approach this, we do a bit of research, okay? You would put a Google, in your Google search, crystal for healing teeth, or crystal to help with blood pressure, or crystal to help relieve grief and loss. Excuse my doggy. And you're going to come up with a range of suggestions. And from there, that's when it can become confusing as well, because there's a lot of conflicting information out there about recommended or suggested crystals for any specific condition. So, you could do some more research. You could look at the crystals, you could look at the images and all of this kind of thing. And I would advise you to do that, especially if you're looking to buy online. Buying online is actually in my experience, a little bit of a nightmare, because even though I understand and know crystals and know quite a lot about them, you're looking at a photograph, and a photograph doesn't always do justice to the actual crystal that you're looking for. And quite often there's a lot of scammers out there, okay? Word of mouth is probably the best way to buy online. And the problems with that is, as well, if you look at product reviews and that kind of thing, I'm very much aware that a lot of these unscrupulous providers or retailers, they will actually purchase fake reviews, shall we say. So you might see a whole heap of reviews going on there, but they're bought, they're paid for, and they're not always legitimate, shall we say. So, in my experience, the best way of buying a crystal is actually going into a wholesaler, a shop, whatever, a distributor of crystals, and allowing yourself to be pulled or guided toward the crystal that you're going to ultimately purchase. This actually is dependent, or it relies upon you using your intuition. You don't need to be a psychic, you don't need to be intuitive. You don't need to have that as a label around you. You just need to be able to go with this flow. Now, quite often people go into a shop or a retailer with a perfect idea in their head of what they actually want to buy, and alternatively, they might know what they want the crystal to give to them, and by that I'm talking about metaphysical properties. So, what this can look like is the person entering into the shop thinking, okay, I want a stone that is going to protect me. I'm going to go for lapis because that is a protector. And then when they get into the shop, they actually find that they're drawn to perhaps something like Tibetan tektite, which is also another protector but has the properties of grounding and boundaries and things like that. So, they end up, because they have the openness to be pulled towards a crystal, they will end up buying one that offers them what they were hoping for, and quite often more than what they were hoping for. Actually, just to be clear here, quite often what I find too in shops is that crystals can not only pull a person towards them, but they can actually also repel them, and that's always worth exploring as well. And then, other times, once we allow ourselves, so let's say that you went in, you thought you were going to buy lapis, but you found yourself in front of the Tibetan tektite, and you're looking at a whole heap of tektite and wondering which one. Well, then you handle them and you get what's called a crystal call. A crystal call, on the other hand, basically is differentiated from the crystal pull. Now, I'm not sure if these are descriptions that other people use or whether I've created them myself, but either way, this is how I define it. The crystal pull is what pulls you towards an area. A crystal call is more specific, it's more personal. Now, you can actually feel the energy of the crystal when you're holding it in your hand. So, let's say the crystal pull takes you to a section of a retail shop. Then, when you're trying to select the perfect crystal for you, you might see one, you think, oh, I like that one. It's so pretty. It's perfect. It doesn't have any occlusions or flaws within the actual crystal itself. Yet, when you hold the crystals, if you experiment, pick one up, put it down, pick one up, put it down, the crystal call is where actually you can't put it down. You've got it in your hand, and for some people, they can actually feel a buzzing type sensation in their hand when this is the crystal that they need to take home. Now, when I say buzzing, when we're talking about energy, people feel it differently. So, for some people, it might feel cool in their hand. It might even feel cold. For other people, it's going to feel hot. If people turn around and say, oh, this doesn't feel right, and it gives me a funny feeling in my stomach, then that's the wrong one, especially if you were talking about the part of the stomach where they feel funny is in the orange chakra, unless, of course, it's carnelian or one of the crystals that is used specifically to treat the orange chakra. But basically, yeah, rule of thumb, it's not going to make you feel uncomfortable when you hold it. It is certainly going to create a sensation if you can feel energy. And I must admit, I've actually seen people experience a crystal call when they've had no experience of energy previously. Basically, a woman I took into the shops, one retail shop, I'm thinking of her as a prime example. She'd never bought a crystal. She wanted to buy a crystal, and she had an idea in her head of what she was going to purchase. But when she went into the shop, she was actually drawn to a crystal that is called shakatite, or is it shatakite? I can't remember now. Something like that's a bit weird. It's a very pretty crystal, but it wasn't one that I was drawn to in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, I wasn't familiar with it at that point in time. But anyway, she ended up buying some of that and taking it home because she could not put it down. That crystal called her, and that became a crystal once she actually evolved into doing her own psychic services and delivering readings. I understand that she used to hold that crystal when she was delivering readings. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So, before a person sets out about the business of trying to purchase a crystal, that is, when they before they go online and try and find the perfect crystal, or before they go into a shop physically. They've usually got an idea in their head about what they're looking for, and the questions around should they be buying a polished crystal or an uncut crystal, and is there a difference, and why would we actually select one over the other? Well, there are many considerations with this. I call the uncut version the raw material. And when we're talking about the raw material, it's an unprocessed. It hasn't been handled by many people. Um, I like them because to me they're more natural. I like them in their pristine and natural state, if you like. But if you want something more refined, then of course these are the things that you need to give consideration to. What parts are going to be displayed? Are you wanting to use this particular crystal as an ornament or in the environment, or are you planning to meditate with it? What is your intention and purpose for purchasing the crystal? Now, just to give you a bit of extra insight here with this image that I've got up, the crystals that are running up the center of the mandala are what we call uncut. A specimen is normally a very small crystal and usually contained in a bit like a little jewelry box or whatever. But either way, these coloured crystals that we're looking at here, the uncut ones, um, they are the ones that have had very minimal handling. They're still going to have been handled, let's be real, because they go from the miner through to the supplier, the wholesaler, or whatever. They get distributed, and everybody's touching them along the way. So, really, when it comes to handling, I don't really think there's a huge difference. Of course, those small ones, like the one that we can see here right at the front on the left-hand base of this image, that is what is called a polished or tumbled crystal. And the way they're treated actually is all of these uncut raw ones that are coloured and running down the centre, if you throw these, it's almost like a cement mix, a sanding type thing. It just spins these crystals around until they become smooth. I think they add a bit of water in there as well, but that's why they're called tumbled stones. They've been thrown around and around and around in a machine. So, generally speaking, what we're talking about here is preference as well. What does a person prefer to use? The other thing is that it really makes no difference, actually, if you're using tumbled or raw stones. Um, and I just thought I should point out that the clear quartz ones that you can see here, they're actually called points. There's a bit of a story. We'll talk about them later. But for the purposes of gridding, it really doesn't make a difference. It's all down to personal preference. So, of course, it does matter actually if your intention is to use these crystals as part of a healing treatment and put them on the person, because, of course, if it's too rough, it's not going to be comfortable. It may actually snap the person out of whatever meditative state that they're going in or trance like state as part of the healing process. The other thing that I've seen actually here is where people actually buy these raw crystals, or they find them, they're quite massive, and I think people need to think about this, that it's all about comfort too. This is why intention's important. You would not put a big weighty rough crystal in the middle of your forehead. It's not going to be comfortable anyway. Other things that you need to think about is, well, are you actually going to be using this for meditation? Are you going to hold it in your hands? So, when we're talking about crystal shapes, let's talk briefly about points before we go on to the next slides. In the image here, the central image is what I refer to as a crystal point, but it's both a point and a tower. It depends on the size of it. But I'm talking actually about the top shape of it. Okay, there's only one pointy end. If you look at this image, you see there's a point on one end only. So, that is called a single point or a single terminator. And if you look at some of the other images, you're going to see where a crystal has a point on both ends. Now, where it's got a point on both ends, it's called a double terminator. It's basically a double point. Okay. And the idea from a if I can speak, metaphysical perspective is that the points generate and direct energy in a direction. So if you have a single point crystal, it is only going to focus healing energy in one direction. So how would I explain this? Let's say I was doing a healing on myself and I wanted to, well, actually, no, let's say I was doing a healing on another person. I had them lying on the floor and I was putting grids around them and I wanted to bring universal energy in from the infinite or the divine. I would put the pointy end towards their body. So if I was trying to bring in healing, let's say this one that's got a little bit of purple on it, that's amethyst. And we can use the amethyst for the third eye, which is your brow chakra or your crown chakra. They're generally where you would direct purple or the amethyst. So, what I would do is actually have the point of that clear quartz crystal with the amethyst in it or the purple in it. I would point that towards the person's head, okay, towards their crown, because the non pointy end, if I'm speaking clearly about this, that's the opening for the universal energy to come in, and then it goes through the point directed to the person. But, okay, so there's a but. When we talk about points, and if you're doing this kind of thing, a double terminator, which means a pointy end at both ends, means that it will send energy from one place to the other. So, generally, a double pointed, you would have perhaps I've got some images coming up that I'll show you, but it would be where it's transferring energy from one particular space to another. It's the up and down, if you like. The energy will traverse back and forth from one to the other. Might be a bit confusing. Feel free to ask a question. Now, other variations of these crystal points that we're looking at here, um, I think that's probably, excuse me, as I click or touch or whatever. I've tried to put a couple of images here. You've got the cluster on the right hand side. Now, that's called a cluster, obviously. If you look at the image on the left hand side, I've put an arrow in there because what I'm trying to highlight here is there's different forms of points that sometimes people might look at it and think that that's a flaw, but it's actually not, right? It's actually an attribute. You're going to see in this yellow image a number of points that aren't quite fully formed and where they're actually growing together on each other. Now, I can't be sure, and this is a problem for anyone that's buying online product based on photographs, and in this photo I can't see if it's showing me an angle of the point. It could be the angle of the point, the way we're looking at it, but I'm thinking as I look at this, it appears that there is a growth on two sides of the first point, and this does happen sometimes. So it's not so much of a cluster, but one that I would call a symbiotic point, in that they're growing together. And sometimes we would interpret the healing properties of this type of cluster to be one that includes families and relationship healings. At the same time, too, we've got to be clear, clusters can also refer or carry healing properties for family units and family dynamics. Now, I've got a question for you. It's a genuine question, and it's in regard to gridding. Gridding is not something I really do a lot of. Sometimes I might, for ornamental display type purposes, create a format like this on the buffet or the sideboard or whatever, um, with the crystals, mainly because it looks pretty, not necessarily for any energetic purposes. But my question is, what is the person who has created this photograph trying to achieve or do with this specific layout? Um, because I don't see anything beyond it being ornamental. Now, I do say I have a lot of information and knowledge about crystals, but that doesn't mean that I know everything. It doesn't mean that I'm an expert, and there may be something here that I don't understand and don't know about. So I'm open to hearing here. But based on my understandings of what I know to date with crystals, my question is, I think this is actually just an ornamental photograph, because you've got the clear, you've got the rose quartz in the center, which of course is going to be theoretically radiating love and confidence and all of that kind of thing. And then you've got all these crystal points around it. Now, I can't tell if those clear points, because they are single terminators, and we just talked about them before, um, I can't really tell what's going on with this. it looks to me as though it's bringing universal energy in uh, to the rose quartz, but it's not taking anything out. So I guess if I was to try and interpret this, perhaps the person is trying to clear, cleanse, and recharge the rose quartz. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts? And, I've got to be honest, I have to wonder if I was to do this kind of grid, would I use double terminators, in and out at the same time? So it's bringing in clearing and charging at all times universal energy into the rose quartz to keep it highly charged, and at the same time offering an opportunity to disperse the metaphysical properties of the rose quartz. Anyway, please make a comment. Let me know what you think might be going on here. So the other thing too is if your intention is purely ornamental and if I can speak generic energizing of an environment, you just want to have a crystal on display. It's really not going to matter if this crystal is a specimen in the rough, and it doesn't matter what the texture is. And for example, we can refer to this crystal that I've got in this image here as still having the healing properties that it's going to send out to the people around it. And you will, just out of just while I think about it, you will still need to clear and cleanse your ornamental and display type crystals as well, because you don't actually need to be wearing it to benefit from it either. So once again, purpose is important. What do you intend for your crystal to be doing as it sits there within the environment? So here are some examples of how you can use amethyst. I mean, amethyst is very, very popular, um, but basically we use it for different purposes. Everybody's got a preference, and in fact, people such as myself who are collectors, we actually like to have amethyst in all its shapes and forms. So the example in the middle is what we call a geode. And you can see within the geode itself, you've got the naturally forming clusters. Now, of course, it's not a large geode. You can get them really quite big. And when they're a really big geode, they're quite often called a cave. Lots of people like to call them an amethyst crystal cave. Now, obviously, they can get really big and they're not suitable for holding when meditating, but they're certainly very nice to have in the environment. If, however, it's a small geode, because sometimes they're quite small as well, then they are suitable to hold in the hand, particularly if that external grey surface that you can see around the crystal clusters, that's the actual natural forming rock that it is. I can't think of the word. It looks like an egg. When you find an amethyst, they're not always broken open, as is the example here. This one's been cut in half. So the normal process is that you can find a rock and it might be a cavern or a little geode, or it might not be. And of course, when you break it open, this is when you get the irregular shapes like the crystal cluster. I'm just trying to think of the words. The crystal cluster that's being held in the palm, that's part of a geode, okay? So sometimes when they break open, they splinter into smaller pieces. What I find disturbing personally as a crystal lover is that some people actually smash the geodes into smaller pieces so that they can make more money when they sell them. However, the image of the hand holding the cluster shows that sometimes they might be naturally forming, albeit broken up a bit, but they still sit comfortably in the hand if you're going to meditate or attempt to do healing. On the other side of this slide, we have the carved heart-shaped one. Now, some people like to have their crystals carved into shapes because it has meaning for them. But at the end of the day, it doesn't impact on the energy that is delivered. So I think people might like it because it's that psychological aspect. They want to do healing involving love and the heart chakra and that kind of stuff, or they want to send a message to somebody with a gift of love. And so they will go for the carved items. The image of the amethyst on the lower right, that's just a close up of what a cluster looks like. Now, if they are individual, because sometimes you will see an individual amethyst crystal, and I'm just trying to be clear with the phrasing here. Each one of those individual peaks, shall we say, in that cluster on the bottom right, that is called a crystal point. Okay, now I refer to the crystal points quite a lot. But if it was to say be a point that's broken away from the whole cluster, then you're actually, it could be a point because it's smaller, a single terminating point, or it could be if it's had the bottom carved off and it's flat, which of course is manufactured. They never break off cleanly, in my experience. Then you're looking at a crystal tower, and they can be very popular as well, but they can also be very big and not suitable for handling, but certainly suitable to put on display in your house. From a buying perspective, I think I've got a responsibility to turn around and say to you here, the image on the right hand side, on the lower right, where it's got the pink background, that may actually be an AI image, okay? Simply because of the background is what makes me think that it is, although it's certainly a very pretty picture, shall we say. And the image on the lower left, I would be very surprised if that's not an AI image because of the texture of it. There's some really good AI images going out at the moment. So these are the things to be aware of when you're actually buying. Now, on the other side, they're not obviously points or anything like that. They're what we refer to as the polished or the tumbled, of course. And I just thought I'd let you know. In my experience, I do love to have them and I do love to put them out on display. I don't usually, or I don't always use them for healing purposes or whatever. And quite often, sometimes if I'm doing metaphysical services, I will get people to hold a crystal, or in fact, I use it. I wonder if I should tell you about this now or later. Look, quite often I will give people crystal messages. So I've got a container where I just hold out and say, pick a crystal, like put your hand in the lolly jar and pull one out. And then I can actually give people messages from the crystals if you like. But the other reason I like to have them out is because children, I need to be a little bit selective. Children like to take them home like lollies, and I've actually found they're so cute. You can get a 3-year-old come in and you've got to actually frisk them before they go out because they might take a pocketful, and quite often they're drawn to the rose quartz actually. So, when it comes to environmental purification, I recall saying to somebody many years ago that crystals are like sponges that you would wipe the bench with, where you might use the sponge on your kitchen bench perhaps to soak up spills. A crystal can soak up energy. I mean, they're not all like this, by the way, but many of them are, okay, and that's why we call them purifiers. Um, some are not energy absorbers as I'm describing, but for the environmental purification purpose, they obviously usually are. So when you have an environmental purification type crystal, then you need to know how to cleanse your crystals if you want them to stay clear and receptive and at optimal function. Now, I will put up a separate video, I think. I don't think I'm going to have time to talk about how to cleanse them all today in this video, but we'll see how we go. Now, as previously stated, I used to retail. I'll give you a story about this. I used to retail crystals, and I also used to provide psychic services from my house. And this also included providing mediumship services at different times. Now, I will never ever forget, because this is imprinted on me. I'd heard about it happening with other people, but I'd never actually had it myself at the time. And I had never questioned whether or not it was actually possible. And you're going, what am I talking about? Well, the fact of the matter is, I did have a visitor, a client arrived to my house, and as she got out the car, I recognised that she was actually going to be entering my premises. And she had a lot of what we call negative energy about her. And that's not to say that the lady was ill intentioned or malicious or lacking in positivity as a human being, that she wasn't a good person. She obviously was, but she was dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of grief and loss. And some of those people that had passed around her had actually passed suddenly, unexpectedly, and some at their own hand. So, anyway, suffice to say, I recall hesitating before I let her into the house, but I decided to let her in anyway. I thought if I didn't, This is going against my better judgment, actually, and it sounds really bad, but this is the fact of the matter. She was an Indigenous lady. Now, for those people that aren't aware, I've worked with a lot of Indigenous people. I've worked in the communities from a social work perspective, and I'm very aware that they experience a lot of discrimination. And so I was concerned if I asked her to sit outside and provide my services outside, that she might perceive me as being racist towards her, which wasn't the case. It was actually about the energy. Okay. So what I did was I thought, no, I'm going to be inclusive and invite her into my house. I don't want her to feel that she's not welcome in my house. So I brought her in and I sat her down at the table, and I, of course, had crystals all around us. That were there on display for retail, and also my own personal use items as well. Now, what happened is I provided the service for her. She was a beautiful lady, truly beautiful. Um, and shall we say, the service went well. And after she left, we hugged goodbye as you do, and it was all very nice. But I went back inside, and some of my crystals, I think there was two of them. One in particular, I'll never forget. It was a smoky citrine, actually, which is I love smoky citrine. But anyway, it was a lovely tower. Which is similar to this type item that you see here. I'm not particularly sure what the image is as far as crystals go. Sometimes it can be very difficult with photographs to actually identify what they are, because citrine, depending on the angle and the lighting and this kind of stuff, and reflective lights, if it's very pale, it can actually throw differently, would be the best description within a video, within a photograph. But within the context, going back to what happened at my house, I went back inside, and I had a couple of towers, just small ones, probably about 5 inches long, that had actually shattered, and I hadn't realised that they had shattered while I was there. So we would describe that on a metaphysical level as they had absorbed the energy, and there was too much energy, and it just broke. Okay. So instead of sitting upright, it was lying down on the sideboard. And of course, in that particular instance, I had to go out and place it outside and bury it. I just want to make a point here, though, with when it comes to flaws and cracks. I actually believe that this enhances the beauty of a crystal, because when we look at it from different angles, we can potentially see different things on it. And by that I mean, if it's got planes, which are psychic planes, if you've got clairvoyance, some people are able to see visions on it. However, at the same time, this particular crystal in this image certainly would not be your first choice for what we call crystal gazing. So, common questions around crystals when people are first entering into collecting them is this idea, or the question of, you know, should I, let's use amethyst here for an example. You can see the ranges that these come in. Should I be getting one that's got a lot of white in it? You know, if I go for the crystal heart, should I be getting the one with the big, deep crystal points, or should I get the one with the fine crystal points, or should I get one that's got pale crystal points? You know, what's best? What should I do? And what's stronger? You know, well, based on my experience, amethyst and any crystal is able and capable of providing exactly what you need. The difference is that if you're buying online, you're not actually able to feel the pull specifically for the crystal that you get. However, if you are into things like invocation and that kind of stuff, you can actually throw it out there to the universe and say the perfect crystal for me under grace in the divine way, right? And you will get, you know, you just have to then trust that whatever you receive is the divinely guided and inspired crystal that you receive when you're buying online. Of course, if you've got the opportunity to go into a shop, you can handle them. But from my experience, the only real difference when it comes to metaphysical properties is that actually the darker the color and the greater the clarity of the points of the crystal, say on the amethyst. If we look on the central image, we're talking about the big heart with all the little hearts around it. The second heart on the right, you might be able to see that it's got bigger points on it than the other crystals. And you can also see that there's some really dark crystals in there, some very vibrant ones. Now, if you had an opportunity to look at them, clarity wise, if they're clear, they're going into what we call gem quality amethyst, okay? And that's the variation, how much you pay for it, really, I guess. Because technically speaking, the size of the points on that heart, I would imagine, are actually quite small, although they appear to be dark and big in this image. So, for the person that's retailing that amethyst, it actually makes sense. They'll probably get more money if they just carve it into a heart shape and sell it online or whatever. But for somebody who perhaps is a jeweler, they will want to have the gem quality and they will want to have larger points that they can actually carve, and the deeper and the darker the hues of the purple, the greater value, shall we say, it's going to have to them. However, for those of us that are purely into metaphysical properties, I don't think there's a real difference. And if there was, I might sort of hazard a guess and say, look, the one in the middle, the larger heart shaped, is actually reminiscent to me of what we call an amethyst flower, but that's not how. When I talk about amethyst, I might do a separate video on the amethyst flower because that's absolutely beautiful. But it's got a lot more white in it, and it's got a very gentle healing vibration attached to it. And I'm just going to make points here, points being the word I'm using a lot of. When we look at these types of amethysts that you can buy, you've got the amethyst geode that's on the right. So this is just a buying tip for you. That is called a geode, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Now, some people will keep them in their perhaps lounge room or a special meditation room as a purifier. And if people have their own metaphysical businesses and that kind of thing, they like to keep a smaller geode there as an environmental cleanser as well. Now, amethyst will need to be cleared, okay? I am very blessed. I didn't realize many years ago I bought part of an amethyst geode that had actually been broken. It had been found by a prospector here in Western Australia, and it actually has a piece of selenite growing naturally inside of it, and that's a natural purifier for the amethyst. Obviously you would place a small piece of selenite very carefully into your amethyst cave if you were going to be clearing it. So, just talking about the colours and hues again a little bit more, you know, and going back to that idea that, do the powers, if I can speak, the metaphysical powers diminish with the paler coloured crystals? Well, once again, I would say, look, not really. In fact, not at all, okay, because you still get what you need, the base metaphysical healing properties from the crystal, okay? So when we talk about rose quartz, for example, we're talking about the heart chakra function, if you like. And of course, I will be doing a video on rose quartz at some point in time. Now, what you see here in these images, these are not the naturally formed. I don't have what we call the raw crystal here. I've got images of the rose quartz towers. I've got the tumbled stones. And on the left, you've got an image of a pendulum. Now, the pendulum is actually um, a good way to outline that rose quartz in its natural state. It's going to have varying shades just through the natural form. Incidentally, just looking at that crystal, the pendulum there, if I was buying online, that could easily be mistaken for the genuine article, and it might actually be a fake. It might be glass. Okay, these are the things that we've got to watch out for. But it does still convey what I'm trying to convey to you, that in its natural form, it's going to have lighter aspects and darker aspects. And you can see this with the tower image in the central image. And this is, when we look at the central image, you can see that rose quartz, even if that's carved into towers, it's got natural flaws within it. It's got the striations, which is the lines going through it. It's got natural cracks in it. To some extent, the cracks are the vulnerabilities. Because that's not so much a striation, that is a vulnerability in the tower. It is more likely to crack, as I mentioned, with the one that shattered when I had somebody come over because it absorbed too much and then it broke. Okay. But the point being that it doesn't make it an inferior crystal. If you were going to be holding that, that is offering you healing for any flaws and cracks that you might have within your own self love, self forgiveness, self appreciation. What I will state is, in my experience of retailing crystals, is that people that suffer from low self esteem and poor self image, they're actually quite often drawn to the paler type, softer, more gentle hues. And I suppose when we're talking about quartz, this is because milky quartz, which is the white quartz, that in itself carries very nurturing qualities, and we would identify that, forget about the gender stuff of male and female, we would identify these nurturing metaphysical qualities with what we call the divine feminine. Okay, that's the mothering type aspect, the nurturing. And so this is about raising the self esteem. But if we were going, if somebody was drawn, if I was had a client in front of me and they were actually drawn to the dark, and you can get some very dark rose quartz as well, which is just absolutely beautiful. I love it all. Okay, there's no mistaking it. I love all of them. I don't care how light they are or how dark they are, and depending on the day and how I'm feeling will determine which color I'm going to. But the darker type rose quartz, I find that people who struggle to forgive themselves for what they perceive to be their shortfalls is what they go for. So there are variations on themes, and I guess there's variations on the depth of emotion as well. And, we can't really, whatever crystal you're buying, if you were going for the really deep amethyst, the deep colored, that will have one specific purpose. It'll still do the general, you know what I mean? It's like, this is what it heals, but under different circumstances, it's going to focus its energy on these specific issues related to what you're addressing, if that makes sense. And yeah, okay, so moving on, I think it just comes down to personal preference and how you're feeling on the day, and you can't go wrong with whatever shade you get. So, just of course, I've got the rose quartz here again, because now we've got the natural state. We've also got the spheres, which are the circle ones on the right hand side, and then of course we've still got these towers in the center. Now, the other question that people will ask is around these cracks, these flaws. Now, I have spoken to them a little bit in the previous slides, but just to revisit that, okay? In some instances, these flaws and cracks actually enhance the healing process. And sometimes, depending on the crystal that you're going to buy, sometimes they've actually got bubbles in them. I don't think I've seen rose quartz with bubbles in them. If I saw bubbles in rose quartz, I'd be thinking that I was buying glass. But, you know, these big crystal balls with the flaws, um, yeah, look, they have a targeted healing power, shall we say. If there's fractures and snaps, perhaps feeling trauma, because trauma is a bit of a fractured type condition, if you like, cracks in the processing or whatever, mental processing and that kind of thing, then it might actually have specific healing qualities for you. But the other thing is too that there's a way to navigate, and we'll be talking about this, a way to navigate and personalize the healing properties of a crystal. And we do that through the attunement and programming, which will be another video. So the other questions come around, should I buy polished or the uncut raw version? Now, this comes down to your personal preference and the purpose and your intention of using these crystals. Now, I'm not always into rose quartz. I've struggled a bit with images today, which is why you're seeing more rose quartz. But I will say to you, there are some people that actually believe that if they buy tumbled stones or carved stones, that these crystals hold the energy of the person that has handled them or prepared them before they have been sent to them. And I would say to them, well, I see that as a bit of a flawed rationale for two reasons, right? One is, unless you find that crystal in the ground yourself and you're the only one that's handled it besides Mother Nature, it's going to have other human energy on it with the people that handle, pack it, dig it out, break it up, that kind of stuff. Because, for example, these little, the image on the right, these are crystals that have been broken up. So it was probably a great big rock to start with. I've seen some really big lumps of rose quartz. It's just amazing. But those rocks will have been shattered down to smaller size. So the point being, if you know how to use crystals, then you will know how to program them. You will know how to clear them of anybody else's energy. I obviously, as I've said, will be talking about that in future videos. So it's actually irrelevant from that perspective, is the way I see it. But when would I avoid using the uncut crystals as opposed to the polished ones? There are times, I believe there's a time and a place to use any of them. Um, One would determine whether or not I'm going to be using them for healing on other people, like we've seen in other images where a person is lying down and you're actually resting crystals on them. You wouldn't put, as a rule, unless it was a very small um, rose quartz like this, the uncut version, you wouldn't put that in the middle of somebody's forehead because it will probably be uncomfortable. Other times it might be that if you've got a tumble crystal that's a bit of an odd shape, if you had a very well endowed lady, it might be that the little tumbled stone will roll and it's not going to stay in place, stuff like that. You've got to use your common sense a little bit. What else can I say about it? You don't want a great big chunky anything resting on a person. But you could, as I say, put down the smaller ones. Then there's a matter of, depending on the crystal that you're working with, if you're going to meditate with it, it might not be comfortable in your hand. So you want to look at something that's comfortable. The other thing is, too, that sometimes some crystals, they actually have a residual dust, if you like, that's not always healthy. So you wouldn't want to be carrying that in your hand. What else can I say about these? Just be, I guess, a little bit mindful. Do your research on the crystals that you're buying, especially once you've identified the purpose that you're going to be using it for, because uh, I will be doing in the safety section outlining some of the crystals that might have toxins in them, because at the end of the day, crystals are minerals and they do have trace elements in them, and not all are actually safe for handling. So I suppose talking about crystal cautions or the fact that it's not always safe, we may as well talk about toxicity in some crystals. As I said, because there's trace elements in them. So this is not an extensive list. I might try and do one later on, but basically some of the popular crystals such as malachite and cinnabar you wouldn't hold in your hand in the raw state. I think they've got traces of arsenic in it. Just do your homework, right? I had also forgotten that there can be a few issues with pyrite, which is why I put this issue of pyrite in here. It it's an iron sulfide, so therefore it contains sulfur. Now, the caution with this, I'm going to speak about this one because I actually have a beautiful cluster. Wish I could take a photograph and share it with you. It's not so beautiful anymore, I must say. It is rainbow pyrite, so it actually really has the hues, like the peacock feather that is on it. But anyway, where I'm going with the pyrite, I'll tell you about mine in a moment. But when pyrite is exposed to heat, it does form a sulfur dioxide. So that's probably not a big deal for those people that live in cold climates, but for those of us that live in warm climates or very hot ones, we need to be very careful and mindful of where we might put it in the house, especially if we're using it as a display item. So we would not want to put it on the windowsill, is where I'm going, if you live in a climate where it's 45 degrees. And we certainly would not be looking to make what is called an elixir from pyrite. I understand that, and I might not be correct with this. If you've got the answers for this, let me know. I believe it can actually release arsenic as it oxidizes. And this is where I'm a little concerned, because as I do these videos, I actually remember these things. I've forgotten a lot of this stuff and I revisit it. But where I'm going with this is my beautiful pyrite cluster has actually started to oxidize. And what this means is it's starting to fall apart. It was a heap of, well, actually, it is, I think, even octagonal shaped pyrite that is all joined together. And what's happening is it's oxidizing, it's turning to dust with the joins. You may as well say if it was a bunch of bricks being glued together with cement, the cement is oxidizing and the bricks are now separating. And this is what's happening with my pyrite cluster. So it's got a lot of dust around it because it's oxidized. So I'll probably need to put some gloves on and clean that area. I'm reluctant to get rid of it. Maybe I can actually, and when I say get rid of it, I don't mean throw it in the bin. I mean go and bury it in the garden. I think for me, with that particular cluster, I'm going to keep them as they fall apart and keep the little individual ones and just dispose of that cohesive stuff, shall we say, the naturally forming cohesive stuff. But yeah, do your homework on the crystals that you buy. So we've talked about rose quartz a fair bit in this video, but here's a buying caution for you, and it doesn't just apply to rose quartz. The bottom line is there are scammers out there, especially if it is to do with online marketing. Now, the scammers might actually be deliberately misleading you into believing that they are selling a product that actually they don't have, and they just want to take your money off you. There is that aspect. They also may be trying to sell you an inferior product for top of the range prices, gem quality, telling you it's gem quality, but then you get an inferior product. I certainly can relate to that. But at the same time, I always take an approach of buyer beware. I don't pay too much for any item I might buy from a new supplier, because I want to check out the product first. Now, the other thing too is I will leave product reviews and seller reviews online where possible, depending on where I bought it from. And we in Australia, if I was to buy a product from an Australian company and they sold me something, we have buyer protections. But when you're buying online for overseas, we don't have those protections. You know what I mean? Everything that we do that's buying online from overseas has got risk attached to it. Now, because I've been in the industry, I'm well aware of some of the scams that these people will get up to when they're trying to rip people off. Many years ago, there was actually an issue with moldavite, which has become very popular. It's supposed to be very rare and it's extremely expensive. And what these people had done was they learned that if they actually melted, we call them Sprite, it's a lemonade bottle, it's a soda bottle or whatever, it's a plastic. When they melted them down, these bottles actually looked like moldavite, and they were selling them online as moldavite. And when people got them, some of them weren't even aware of it. Now, another technique that these scammers might use, which is where this image comes in, is they might actually be using AI images. This particular picture here, this is AI created. Now, I've had a look around online as I'm doing this video trying to find images for you, and I can see that this business of creating crystal images from AI is actually getting really, really good. And for people that are not familiar with crystals and haven't been able to go into a retail shop, they might really struggle to separate what is real and authentic from the fake image because they've become so good at creating them. Now, just going back to a strategy that you can use when you're taking the risk and testing a new supplier, what I have done, and I'll try and keep this brief because it is a long video, because I have the experience and I can actually tell the genuine article from the fake, right? When I buy online, and I will buy them off eBay and that kind of stuff, I will contact the seller and say, please be aware that I do leave product reviews and feedback, and I am able to tell the genuine from the fraud. I used to sell crystals. So I give them fair warning. Now, if they send me a dodgy, I'm going to leave that feedback up there saying, it does not appear to be authentic, or, which I actually haven't had that, not most of the time it's going to be a case of not like the image, very poor quality, you get what you pay for, okay, because that genuinely is what has happened. And I haven't been upset because I've paid so little for it. But what has happened, and what you might find too, is that when you leave this kind of feedback, they particularly, and I get emotionally manipulated with this because I feel sorry for them if they sell me a genuine but really poor quality item, because I know they're just trying to make a living, right? They may come back to you and say, look, we don't like your feedback. We want to make you happy. Um, we want to do X and Y. And more recently, what happened for me, I was looking for red garnet and I got sent this really shabby stuff, nothing like the image. And I basically refused it. Actually, I said, "Look, don't bother. I'm not really interested. I don't want to basically pursue this anymore." And they came back and they said, "But we want to make you happy and we want you to change your review." I said, "Yep, no problems." Because they sent me some photographs of the other items they had, and I thought, "Oh, that's a nice carnelian bracelet," as you do. And I said, "Well, if you insist, as you do," I said, "Thank you very much." So they sent it to me and I absolutely loved it. It was a replacement item. So I was still honest in my feedback, but I was less transparent, shall we say. I put on my feedback was that I was unhappy with the original purchase because it was not what I had expected. And I was informed, which I was, that it was the last of their product and that the seller had replaced the item. And I was extremely happy with the replacement product was what I put on my review. But anyway, the seller came back to me and they said, "Look, we're not happy with that feedback." And I said, "It's a positive feedback, you know." I said, "Because it's still honest. I have a problem with being dishonest." I said, "It's still honest feedback." I said, "But it reflects very well on you as a seller to recognize and to try and make good with your customer base." I said, "Most people are going to see that as positive and be prepared to take a risk." And they came back and they said, "Oh, thank you. We didn't think of it like that." And I said, "Yeah, no, it makes you look like a good seller." So, there's a bit of a caution and a tip for you as well as a strategy. So, something else to be aware of is some countries like China, I'm going to name them, they're not alone. There will be other places that do it too. But I'm aware that some of the stuff that or comes out of China is marketed as quartz, but it's actually glass. And once again, I say that it's difficult to know until you actually receive it. So, this little ball here, this is just a display image. Sometimes they're marketed as being crystal, but this one, I would say, huge, rife with risk buying it as a crystal ball because it could well be a glass one. But if you're looking for a clear quartz crystal ball, um, they don't usually have pockets in them. Actually, that's not the correct word. They don't have bubbles in them. So if I bought a clear quartz crystal ball and it had air bubbles inside of it, I would be pretty confident that that's glass. Okay. But I might have an image here. I'm not sure. Oh, yes, I do. I do have another image. I think if not in this one, it will be on the next video of what a really beautiful clear quartz crystal ball looks like. And sometimes they have flaws, which just enhance them from where I sit. These manufacturers in China, just so that you know, they're so good at creating glass and coloured glass that this is why I say, you can buy your rose quartz and it's actually glass. You can buy what's called cherry quartz and it's not naturally forming, it's glass. Same with, they can do it with so many different ones and make them look like the genuine article. So, well, when you're looking at a photograph, they look like a genuine article. So in between recording, I thought I'd actually just go and grab some images of crystal balls and what might be authentic and genuine and what isn't, right? When I said glass balls with bubbles in the middle, that's the central image, okay? So that one you can pretty well be sure if that's being flogged off, sorry, that's Australian, as a genuine crystal ball, I would say think again, that's a glass ball. The image on the left with all of its flaws, beautiful, stunning crystal ball, absolutely. Okay, now I will talk about these more when we do the clear quartz, but I know people that are clairvoyant who actually value the planes. Mm, actually, I'm not going to talk about it because you can't really see in this image. It would just get confusing. The other ball on the right hand side, that looks to me as though it's got etchings or carving on it. So that's a glass ball. I don't see that one as being a crystal ball. And in fact, actually looking at that a little bit closer, hazarding a guess, that might even be an AI image. Now, this tip is relevant whether or not you're buying online or at a retail store, because in my experience of going around to different places, stalls, fairs, and all of this kind of stuff, quite often you're going to see a product like this point in the central image being marketed as citrine. Now, I'm fairly confident without having a look at that that is not citrine, okay? And this is because genuine citrine actually is like the right hand image, okay? It is a lighter yellow, and it can be very transparent. It can have lemon tinges to it and that kind of stuff. What we're actually looking at with this point here is heat treated amethyst. It's probably poor quality amethyst, and they've decided to apply heat to it. And when amethyst has heat applied to it, it goes this golden yellow color. And this is often passed off as being citrine. It's definitely not. Okay. Now, having said that, it's not always about some manufacturer somewhere trying to scam people and applying heat to it and calling it citrine. Sometimes amethyst, when you find it in its natural state, certainly in hot areas of Australia, perhaps, where a point may have been exposed to the elements because it gets so hot out there, it can actually turn yellow itself. So it still can be naturally forming, but it's not citrine. Okay, that's a big difference. And I do have to laugh because when we're talking about citrine, there's another thing that comes to mind. Okay. Now, I actually do quite like prasiolite, but the thing is, prasiolite is not naturally forming. Prasiolite, if you know anything about it, is the other name that some people call green amethyst. So if we look at the image on the right hand side, some people think they're looking at green amethyst. They're not. It's actually citrine that's been exposed, I think, to heat. It might have been manually treated, I can't remember, but, gosh, what am I looking at with this central video? Had to check my notes for a moment because I actually haven't seen naturally forming prasiolite. So, what I did in the process of putting this together, I actually educated myself a little bit too. This was something new to me. I actually didn't know that prasiolite does naturally form, but only in one place in the world, and that's in Brazil. And that's the central photograph. Okay, that's the real McCoy of prasiolite. But most of the stuff that we see online is actually treated citrine. The other image on the left hand side, that to me looks like green quartz. Now, some people will say it doesn't exist, but I've only ever seen it twice in my entire life. It's so rare. And I saw it, some prospectors had it, they'd found it and they showed me it. So just giving you a little bit of information there. So it can be very difficult to separate the genuine article from a fraudulent article. So I did Google a gem and mineral website and I got the following information about carnelian because this is what we're looking at here. Carnelian has a range of colours and it varies from light orange to a deep reddish brown. And it can also have red or brownish red hues. Now, it can either be translucent or opaque, and it's got a glass like sheen or luster. Okay, and it has it's considered to be hard on what they call, I can't remember what MOHS, what that stands for, but basically it's a hardness scale. So where we're talking about with carnelian, it is actually quite hard, but it can be scratched by other materials that are harder, and it rarely forms as a distinct crystal like what we've seen with the amethyst and rose quartz points. And it is typically large and granular, and it has a pattern. I'm not going to go through all of it here, but quite often what we see being marketed as carnelian is actually red agate. So to try and identify the difference, if you're looking at a photograph, this beautiful picture in the image, now they might be orange glass beads, but you won't know until you actually have it in your hand and you can look at it. Okay, but if you look at the image on the top left, that is genuine carnelian. That's a mineral specimen. If you look at the one beneath that, that is the I think it's called opaque, isn't it? Where you can't actually see through it. It's not translucent, but that to me, from a photograph, appears to be the genuine article. If we look over at the right hand side up the top, that's red jasper. Okay, that's not carnelian. And then when we look at this little palm stone on the right hand side underneath, that one appears to me to be actually red jasper and polished, but it's got enough of that redness there that people are trying to pass it off as a carnelian palm stone. So when it comes to the one that's a palm stone, it's not necessarily that people are trying to be fraudulent. It could just be that they don't realize that this is red jasper and not carnelian. So that's what I mean about misnaming. So these are some other examples of carnelian, or what is being sold as carnelian, and I think this is actually a better example of what they look like. Now, as I said, it's not always a case of fraudulent. It's quite often a case of misnaming. Sometimes I've observed when it comes to online buying from people in India, they will often misname the products, and it's not necessarily, in fact, actually, I have had people turn around and say to me, never buy from India because you'll always get something dodgy. That is not correct in my experience. Sometimes you actually get some really good quality stuff from there, but it's helpful if these people know what they're actually selling and if they know the product. And a lot of the time, the people that you're interacting with online, they're really just retailers. They're not passionate about crystals and they're not geologists. They are just getting a product. They look at it, they think it's an orange stone, and they're going to call it X and Y because that's what they think it is. It could even be a language barrier. Either way, hopefully some of these images here are showing you what is genuine and what isn't. And when I do the individual videos on the specific crystals, I'll go into each one in more depth, including the metaphysical properties. So ethical buying is something that I think that we're all bound to do because um, as you may be gathering, once we start collecting crystals, it's a little bit addictive, and I'm as guilty as the next person. And I've had to use a lot of self control now to stop myself doing the, oh, I love that. It's beautiful. I want it. Right. Because there is a limit to everything. Okay. Once something has been depleted and taken and mined to the nth degree, it's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. It takes thousands of years to make these things. Now, the other thing is when we talk about ethical buying, that we need to look at how it's sourced. And lapis is a prime example of this, right? I'm obviously one of those people that just loves lapis. And my preferred lapis is actually the lapis that is found in Afghanistan and some parts of Pakistan. It is different to the lapis that is found in South America, which is still beautiful, but is not the same. And what you can see looking at these images, so some people will be drawn to the South American, that's the image on the left hand side, whereas other people such as myself are drawn towards the Afghanistan or Pakistani type lapis. Well, the problem with this is you can access the South American without any great issues. There's no human rights violations or whatever. But if we are buying from Afghanistan, that is hugely problematic in that apparently the mines are owned by the government and they are no longer functioning. They haven't been using them for quite some time. And therefore, any Afghanistan lapis that we find on the market here in the Western world has probably been sourced as part of the black market. And, I mean, we can do the moral high ground, which is like, oh, if it's been bought on the black market, well, then I don't want it. Well, there is that, but even more importantly, I understand because I've got a gentleman up the road from me, my computer guy actually, he's from Afghanistan, and I found this out from him because I had asked him, I said, oh, you're from Afghanistan and you've still got family over there, you couldn't get me some lapis, could you? The poor guy almost had a heart attack, and he was the one that said to me, no, he said, that's illegal. He said, if they catch you taking lapis out of the mine because it's government owned and out of the country, he said, they will actually shoot you for that. That is a capital offence. So you might want to think about that kind of thing. I'd like to support the Afghanis to be able to um, finance and fund their lifestyles, but I personally don't want them to put their lives on the line or risk the lives of their families because there are people that will profiteer off their risks. And lapis is not the only crystal that's in really short supply. So, this is what I'm talking about ethical buying. Find out how rare the crystal is that you're looking to buy, and if there's any risks associated with it being brought to the West or whatever. Just food for thought. So, when it comes to crystal care, you spend a lot of money quite often, most of the time, buying the crystals of your dreams or those that resonate with your heart. So it's very important that we actually care for those crystals anyway, beyond the fact that actually they're the bounty of the universe, the bounty of the goddess, if you like. We want to be able to look after them. We want to keep them functioning well, and we want to keep them pristine. So this video has been very long. What I'm going to do, this will be my next video. I will talk about crystal care in the next video on this series. So, my friends, once again, thank you for being part of my journey. Thank you for the opportunity to unite with me to build a community talking about crystals and getting to know them and share our experiences to enhance um, just our information education and understanding of crystals. Feel free. I would encourage you to leave feedback on who you may have used as a supplier who's reputable and ethical, an ethical sourcer. Share your information with us. Let us know. The more the merrier, basically. And if you've got comments to add to those that I've put up today, I invite you to put those in as well. And I also invite you to participate in all the future videos, including crystal care, because we only know what we know. And we only grow in our knowledge when we share our information. But for now, I'm going to say thank you again. Love you, leave you. Have a blessed day, blessed week. Catch you on the next video. Bye bye for now.